Ok, bonjour, Frédéric Menez et voici Alex Plogaro à ma droite. Merci à Francesc et Andrew de donner un petit mot d'ouverture. Rien préparé, si ce n'est juste que c'est un petit peu une année avec une bougie d'anniversaire. Ça a commencé en octobre ou en septembre, il y a un an, le Meetup. The first meeting was last year in October, I guess, in a pub, in an Irish pub. With 3 presentations, and I completely blew my timing. I went over like 20 minutes and I got people a bit tired with my talk, so I'll make it short this time. Oui. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut dire sur le Meetup? En fait, une des envies, c'est de rendre compte de l'actualité de Go. Je suis pas un expert, je pratique au quotidien plus ou moins. Bon, là, j'ai un petit peu décroché, je vais m'y remettre. Je travaille sur un produit que j'essaie de concevoir et puis j'en parlerai une prochaine fois. Donc l'idée, c'est de rendre compte de l'actualité de ce langage. C'est aussi, enfin moi, mon envie personnelle, c'est d'inviter les gens à collaborer entre eux, se rencontrer sur GitHub ou alors par le biais de ce rencontre pour ensuite travailler ensemble, fomenter des plans, des projets et puis collaborer. C'est plus dans une optique open source pour favoriser la création de liens de communauté. Après, il y a plein d'autres bons côtés avec l'organisation de Meetup. Alex, tu veux dire un petit mot?
Je vais juste dire qu'il y a 300 personnes qui sont inscrites sur Meetup Go et ça c'est super. Il n'y a pas 300 personnes ici, mais c'est vrai que d'habitude il n'y a pas tout le monde qui vient, mais c'est vraiment bien que je trouve que c'est super qu'il y a assez beaucoup de personnes ici. Merci d'être venu.
Ouais, donc avant que j'oublie de le dire, en fait, la saison 2 commence et donc si vous avez des trucs sur le feu, à la maison ou bien au bureau, des projets ou d'actualité, contactez-nous et puis on fera un petit calendrier. Voilà. Henri Lepic est dans le chemin, c'est notre 3e acolyte. And Andrew, I was just saying, basically the idea of the meetup was, from my point of view, is to foster collaborations between open source developers. So that's my idea, and there's many ideas behind the meetup, and there's also the idea of meeting people who actually work on technology and the language. So here's to you now.
Thank you. Hello. Bonjour. So I just flew here from Australia. I got on a plane about 38 hours ago, and I've been in airports and planes until about 3 hours ago. So if I fall over or something, then please pick me up and take me to my hotel. I apologize if the talk ends up running short. Thanks very much to you guys for running this group. I run a similar group in Sydney in Australia, and there are dozens of such groups all over the world now, which is a really exciting thing. And I really love being able to visit these Go user groups wherever I go around the world. Just to get an idea, who here actually uses Go and like writes Go code? Great. So my talk is appropriate for the audience. That is a good thing. For those of you who don't know who I am or what I'm about, my name's Andrew. I work on the Go project. I live in Sydney. About a quarter of the Go team is in Sydney. The rest are in the United States, mostly. And I am, I guess, kind of like the public face of the project. I've been around since just after the project launched, and I do a lot of this kind of stuff, talking, writing blog posts, and arguing with people on internet forums, which, you know, is kind of fun, I guess. I also do work on the core. I do all the releases and all the release infrastructure and build infrastructure and other stuff like that. So I'm sort of in engineering, but also a person. So this talk is called What's in a Name, and it's about naming. So there's the old joke, there are 2 hard problems in computer science, off by one, naming, cache validation, and off by 1 errors. See, I'm jet lagged already. But it's an old joke, but it's a good one. And it's true, naming is really important. naming is basically the first interface that anyone has to your code, reading the names. And so readability is one of the defining qualities of good code. You can't have good code if it's not readable. And good names are a critical component of readability. And so in this talk I just want to talk about what makes good names in the context of Go. So in general, good names should be consistent. That is, they should be kind of like all the other names. It should be easy to kind of guess what the name is if you know what the other names are. Good names should be short so that when you're typing it, it's easier to type. And good names should be accurate. They should describe the thing that they are naming accurately, so that there's less so it's easy to understand. And as far as the length of names goes, this is my rule of thumb. The grammar is a little bit tortured in this statement, but what I'm trying to say is the greater the distance between where a name is declared and where it is used, so should the name be longer. So if you declare a name on one line and you only use it on the next line, then it should be really short. But if you declare a name somewhere and it's used in files in different projects, then it probably should be long and more descriptive. So that's a general rule, just to keep in mind. Names in Go use mixed case, you've probably noticed, which means each new word should begin with a capital, or if it's unexported, it should start with a lowercase, but each new word should then be with a capital. Don't do the Pythonic kind of underscore thing, that's bad. And similarly, acronyms like HTTP and ID and so on should all be capitalized. Even when it sort of goes into the next word like that, you should still capitalize. Local variables should be short. A lot of people want to make their local variable names more descriptive, but that's kind of not really good Go style. Generally, I find that long local variable names kind of hide what the code is actually doing. You spend all this time reading the names instead of reading the control flow and reading the code. And so you should prefer names like I to index, prefer R to reader. Sometimes longer names do help in functions that are long or in functions that have many variables, but often the solution is actually to refactor the function to be a shorter function which has fewer variables or less context to understand, so you can use shorter names. So if you feel like you need long names, maybe the solution is not actually long names, it's something else. So here's an example of some of my code that I kind of made to look bad. Maybe it's bad anyway, but I made it bad by using long names. Now, does anyone think that this looks like normal to them? Like, it's alright if it does, because in a lot of languages this is normal. If I was writing Python, these are the kinds of names that I might use. But that's bad. The title says bad, so I don't blame you for not raising your hands. But so this is the same code, but with the names that I actually used. So flipping back, you can see the receiver name is actually R in the good code instead of repo, because it appears throughout the code. The whole subject of this function is the repo, so R is a fine name for it. Another one that I see a lot in readability reviews is variables and range statements. People use long names for them, but it's like, I'm looping over commits. Why do I need to use the full name commit? Surely C is obvious enough. Like, it's on nearly every line of the following few lines, so C is a perfectly adequate name. And it's particularly onerous on lines like this where you have multiple instances of the same commit, right? So that just kind of gives you the flavor of what I'm talking about here. So parameters to functions are kind of like local variables. They're declared just the same way as local variables. They're part of the local variable scope inside the function. And so they should have similar kind of names to local variables in general. And so where the types of the arguments are descriptive, like if you have types like duration or writer or even just func, you can use just short names. You can say D for duration and F for func. But when the types are less descriptive, if you just have like arguments that are ints or strings, then you need to be more descriptive for documentation purposes. So, you know, this function would be totally inscrutable, if this was just A and B, right? You need to say that it's seconds and nanoseconds for that to make sense. But, you know, sometimes you have a mixture, like the has prefix function from the strings package. It takes an argument S and a prefix. It's pretty obvious that S is the string you're comparing and prefix is the prefix. Right, so use your judgment as well. Named return values are a kind of tricky subject. My personal opinion is that they should only be used for documentation purposes. There's kind of a temptation to use named return values with the naked return. Does anyone not know what I mean by that? It's like, if I show you, I can show you. You can have this function foo, which returns an error like that, and you can assign, you know, a value to that return value, and then you can just say return like that. And so it actually works like a variable that is then implicitly returned when you say return. My suggestion is don't use this feature of the language. It's really not that useful, and occasionally you'll end up returning from some nested scope where you've shadowed this variable and you end up returning something different to what you expect. And so just don't do it. It's, you know, it's not really that useful. Don't worry about it. The one place where using named return variables for semantic reasons is important is if you want to do something like in a defer block, which is a function that returns, a function that is called after the function returns, you can actually refer to that, you can enclose over that return value and update it after the function returns. So I can actually say, you know, I can return an error, but then I can override that error in the defer block. And so that's actually a useful idiom. It's pretty rare that it's a really good idea to do that, but there are some circumstances where it is. So anyway, in short, if you don't understand what I'm talking about now, just don't use named return values, except for documentation purposes. So in this case, you can see we have the copy function that returns an int64 and an error value, and being able to say that it's the number of bytes written in the return value is really important. Similarly, the scan bytes from the scanner package, being able to say that int is the number of bytes to advance forward and token is the token being returned. These are all valuable pieces of documentation. But don't do it unnecessarily. Like in the thing I just created, you know, having error, it's just redundant, so don't do that. Okay, receivers, function receivers. Function receivers are just like arguments, which are just like local variables. And so they should be short. And the convention is that receivers should be a single letter, sometimes two letters, that are reminiscent of the type, the receiver type itself. So, you know, B for buffer, SH for server handler, although honestly I would probably say H in that case. And, you know, R for rectangle and so on. If you're using longer names, or even worse, if you're using this or self, don't just cut it out. You should be using single letter names. Okay. So, it's important to remember when you're exporting names from your packages, making them part of the package's API, to consider that the package name is actually part of how those names are used. So, you know, we have the like bytes.buffer, which probably most people in this room have used before, and strings.reader. We don't call them bytes.bytebuffer and strings.stringreader. The authors of these packages knew that any user of those packages was going to be using the package name when they're referring to those types. So always keep that in mind as well. Sometimes it makes it seem a bit strange inside the package. When you're actually writing the package code, the names can seem a bit abrupt, a bit short. But when you are using them from outside, you can see the real benefit of keeping it short like that. Yeah. Interface types. So interfaces are kind of a special case. Basically, the naming policy for interfaces that have one method in them is to just put ER at the end of the method name and just leave it at that. Sometimes there are better words for the interface name, but generally this is the way to do it. And sometimes, you know, it doesn't even end up right. Like read and reader is perfect. That's correct English. That's really nice. But then in the OS, no, what is this? This is the database driver package. It has an execer interface, which is an exec method. But execer is not a word. Maybe it is in French, probably not. But it's definitely not in English. But we do it anyway because it makes it predictable, which is one of the important aspects of readability. Custom error types. Who here has declared a custom error type before, or an exported error value? Okay, not many. But it's a useful part of API design. When you want to signal a specific error, you'll often declare some exported error value that people can test against. And so in that case, if you have an error value, you should call it something, foo, format in this case. If you have a custom error type, that is, you may be returning error values of this type, you should call it foo error. So in this case, we have exit error from the OS exec package. And that's just a convention, but it's definitely one worth sticking to. That way, when you see the name something or foo you can tell whether it's a type or a variable just by that convention alone. And that's a convention we use in the standard library and a convention that is used in a lot of open source packages too. Package names are pretty simple. They don't use the camel case, mixed case of most variable names. If you really need to use multiple words, you can use an underscore. It's not really very nice to do that, but you can. But yeah, bear in mind that package names give meaning to all of the exported names from that package, so you should pick a meaningful package name. So if you have, does anyone have a util package or a common package? No. It's better to have many smaller, meaningful packages with meaningful names than it is to have this kind of catch-all, util, common, and so on. But I will say that Ken Thompson always had a C file in almost every one of his projects called proc.c, just proc.c, you know, just because. And that was just where everything went, like the whole program. So you're not alone, you're in good company if that's what you do. But you probably shouldn't do it. Also, you should consider the import paths of your packages. So the convention is that the last component of your import path should be the same as the package name. So, you know, package gzip is compress/gzip. You can actually call it package whatever, but it's very surprising to import compress gzip and then get this name whatever introduced into your namespace. So you should always keep the directory name and the package name the same. Now there are some certain exceptions, but none of you will probably ever have to think about them. You should avoid stuttering, repetition in repository and package paths. So here's a really terrible import path, which is code.google.com/p/goauth2/goauth2. So this is totally my fault. It's my package. I created it when I was young and stupid. I'm not old and wise, I'm just old and stupid now. If I was doing it again, I would just leave it there and import it as GoAuth 2 instead of having this unnecessary little extra piece. And so when we did do it again, and this is the new OAuth 2 package that we're working on, it is actually at github.com/golang/OAuth 2, and it imports this package OAuth 2. So it's perfectly fine to have all of your package source in the root of your repository. That's a fine practice. Or to have like the most important package or command in the root of your repository. That's a good thing to do. So a lot of the examples in this talk have all been from the standard library, and I'll say the standard library is an excellent place to look if you want to learn about Go idiom, if you want to understand how to write good Go code. There's a lot of good Go code in the standard library. But when we were writing the standard library, we were all still learning Go. And so there's actually a lot of stuff that's really not that great. So don't come to me after this talk and say, but I found this thing in the standard library that's not the same as what you just said. That's right, because we've learned since. And people have filed issues to like, oh, we should clean up package X. But the reality is that there's no reason to kind of go and do a mass renaming of some internal stuff inside a package just for the sake of consistency. The code works, it's there, just leave it alone. So yeah, look to the standard libraries, but just be aware that it's not 100% as we'd do it if we were rewriting it again today. Whoa, so that was fast. So in conclusion, use short names. I hope everyone takes that single thing away, use short names, and think about the context in which the names are used. So think about the users of your names when you name things. Because often we just think about ourselves when we're writing code. We think, what makes sense to me now, here? You really want to think what makes sense to them, or it could even be me later. What's going to make sense later when I'm using this from somewhere else? And finally, there's no good hard rules in this. There's always exceptions. There's always ways in which you can do things differently on a case-by-case basis. So use your judgment as well. All right.